playing for the American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues. My oh my.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's go.
Baseball is back. The FSS Plus podcast is back. Jason Churchill along with Joe Doyle. Joe, pitchers and catchers, baby, pitchers and catchers. And it's always a meaningful time of the year for baseball fans of all, ages. That right now really isn't the story for me. Like, it's fun to think about, but isn't the story right now? Those 4 big free agents, we keep talking about it. That's the story right now, is it not?
I don't know. Is it the free agents, or is it the bungle that Scott Boras has kind of created for himself? I don't know where this is going to go, Jason. I don't know about you, but I think he dug himself a hole. We'll talk about it as we get into
I
this
think there's a
episode.
chance that all 4 of those guys are going to have to take a lot less money. There's a chance. I wouldn't predict that all 4 of them, but there's a chance that every single one of those 4 left are going to take a lot less money. Well, wasn't Matt Chapman offered $100 million by the Blue Jays a year and a half ago, and he said no?
That was the rumor. And the crazy thing is, when you talk about Chapman, you talk about, I don't less so with Montgomery, but you talk about Chapman, you talk about Snell, you talk about Bellinger, you get them on a 1 or a 2 year deal. I feel like those guys have a lot more to lose going forward. Like, I just think maybe they've peaked. So maybe teams see that, and maybe Boras outplayed his hand a little bit. But all 3 of those guys are in pretty precarious
I think the answer
situations
right now, like if we just use Snell as an example, I think maybe the answer for someone, or maybe all 4 of these guys, is you sign the best multi-year deal you can get, the best 3, 4, 5 year deal you can get. And maybe for Snell, the best 5-year deal you can get is $110 million. When the market at the start suggested 140, 150, 160, right? Maybe you sign the best deal you can get and you get opt-outs after year 1, year 2. Maybe that's what you do. It's a risk, because Blake Snell just came off a 4+ win Cy Young year, and we know his history, but that may be the best possible way for Snell to get something relatively large and still leave, that window open for him to go back out on the market again and try it again next year.
Maybe this is just an industry thing. Maybe the industry is pulling back on long-term pitching deals, because you look back at Robbie Ray's deal, you look at Kevin Gossman's deal, you look at these deals.
Carlos Rodon,
maybe teams just are not willing.
That was a huge deal. Nola got 170.
Yeah. Garrett Cole got a ton of money. Maybe it's a New York problem.
But when New York's not involved, that does hurt.
If you look at
so it's a good point.
Do you think it's that teams just want to commit to arms for 2 or 3 years?
I think there's too many questions about Blake Snell. I think that's the biggest problem. And I think they're trying to use it against him, maybe more than it's actually fair to use it against him. Just because there's ammo against him, I think they're trying to use it. With Montgomery, before last season, what was Montgomery? Eduardo Rodriguez, 4-80. And then he pitched really well with St. Louis, and he really turned it up a notch and was good in the postseason and all that. He was really good last year. And now all of a sudden he's probably $100+ million guy. I think that's part of the problem, is that, well, you haven't been this good your whole career. I think that's part of it too. Matt Chapman and Cody Bellinger, I mean, the writing's on the wall there. We saw this coming. Like we saw, Chapman's got issues. He's more of a defensive guy and a slightly above average hitter. He's got some injury history. He's 30 years old. Cody Bellinger wasn't great last year, but he was good. Had those 2 really off years in LA before he went to Chicago. I think we could kind of sort of see that coming to some extent. The pitching market, though, I don't really understand all that much. I really don't. I'm really interested to see how that ends. And I'm hoping all 4 guys sign with someone, before the end of February, at least. I don't want to see them showing up in May. Players do not have a good track record of signing late and then having good seasons. I don't want to see that, Joe.
It's also just bad for the game. It's bad for the game when you have 4 of your better players on the shelf, just because teams don't want to pay. Like, even if you don't believe that this guy is a 9-figure contract, it's not good for the game if Blake Snell is not on a roster on March 1st.
It's not at all. And I think that's the most important thing. And I'm glad you feel that way too. Because even whether it's with the Yankees or the Angels, I don't care. The Giants, who cares? Get these guys on a roster. Those guys have some star power. I think Blake Snell has big time star power after winning the Cy Young for the 2nd time. He's very fan friendly. You get him in a bigger market than Tampa and San Diego. Yeah. I think he's kind of a fun guy to have around. To be honest with you,
Yep.
I'd like to see him go to the Yankees. For the good of baseball, I'd like to see him go to the Yankees. I think that'd be a lot of fun to watch Snell pitch in that ballpark. All right. This episode of the podcast, we're going to talk MVP. It's early. Games don't start for 6 weeks, but that's the whole point of this. I want to get Joe's preseason MVP picks in each league. I'll share mine. I think, and maybe we'll touch on this as well, Joe. I think just like from a team standpoint, I think the players stack up very, very similarly, where in the NL, there might be some favorites, and in the AL, it might be more wide open. And then we're going to welcome in friend of the show and former big league GM Jim Duquette for a segment or so and talk some big picture Major League Baseball stuff. Joe, we're sitting here with 4 Scott Boras clients available on free agency. I just 4. If you'd have told me in November, these 4 guys are still getting it, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse. I'm really blown away that all 4 of these guys are just sitting around and we just like nothing's going on. Like this is remarkable.
It's not. It doesn't seem like there's a bidding war either. No bidding war. He's got nothing to. He's got no players left on the market to compare those players against. He's got no leverage. That there's just so many ways that those players are losing leverage by the hour. It's amazing that we're here.
All right, let's talk MVP. Let's start in the National League. I think some of these favorites are easy to pick. Ronald Acuna Jr., Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Shohei Ohtani. Some of them are easy. And there was, Ohtani being in the National League this year really kind of crowds that up a little bit. But I think there are, maybe 5 really, really good candidates in the National League at this point. But let's start in the National League. Then we'll go to the American League, where at least I think it's a little tighter and maybe a little more fun to watch. But who you got in the National League as we sit here in mid-February?
Well, I got a guy that I don't know if he's necessarily a favorite. He's definitely a household name. If I'm in Vegas, I'm throwing money at Bryce Harper. Because think about what he did last year, coming back from an elbow injury. Look at the names he's got around him. I think Trey Turner is finally starting to get comfortable and feel his way around Philly. And some of those younger bats, the Bryson Stotts of the world, they're starting to post. They're starting to look like full-time big leaguers. So I think if you put those guys in front of Bryce Harper, it would not stun me. I don't remember if it was 17 or 19, but it would not stun me if Bryce Harper went out and hit 38 tanks, drove in 118 runs, and ran a 325. Like, what are we talking? Like at Bryce's peak, what is he? A 325, 415, like 540 guy.
Juan Soto kind of Mike Trout sort of stuff. That's why he's got a couple of MVPs already. That's a really good pick. Yep. Acuna and Betts led the National League in F4 last year at 8.3. Freeman was just under 8. Matt Olson was just under 7, and then it drops almost a full win to Lindor and Carroll, and Juan Soto was in the National League last year. So that's really interesting. So Harper, I put him up there in the favorites. I know he's going to play first base this year instead of right field, which probably hurts his chances of winning the MVP a little bit. I know he doesn't care. He just wants to win a World Series, but I still really like that pick. That's a really good pick. If you had a dark horse to pull away from the obvious picks, is there someone in the National League that stands out? You kind of think either is going to take that next step or has taken that next step and might just look up in September and be the best player in the National League?
The guy that I go to, so I can't stop thinking about Churio. I mean, Churio would be an insane pick at this stage, and maybe someone to watch. But Austin Riley seems like he's gotten better every year. And he seems like he's surrounded by a cast of guys that are going to give him an opportunity to do a ton of damage. And he plays third base. And he plays a pretty good third base. Not a great third base, but a pretty good third base. So it wouldn't stun me if Austin Riley went out and posted a 6.5 win season, hit 40 tanks, drove in 130 runs. I mean, he's got Harris in front of him. He's got Acuna in front of him. So long as, Matt Olson isn't, bludgeoning all the runs in front of him. He's a pretty good pick.
Yeah, that's a good one. If I were to pick, I would probably go with Mookie Betts. He's going to play a lot of second base this year. We're going to see that F4 skyrocket. I know he played, some second base last year as well. I like Betts. Acuna's an easy one as well. Harper, Freeman. How about my dark horse? How about Fernando Tatis Jr.? Like, this is a guy who, granted, I understand steroids. 2020, he was a 3.5 win player in 59 games. He played 130 games in 2021, was a 7-win player. Last year in 140 games, he was a 4.5 win player. He's 25 years old. We know he can play some right field. We know he can fill in at shortstop a little bit. And we certainly know he can hit and run. He stole almost 30 bags last year. That's my dark horse in the National League is Fernando Tatis Jr. And they're going to need him if they're going to compete. They're going to need Machado and Tatis and Bogarts. They're going to need to hit the snot out of the ball because, boy, I don't like at all what they're doing with that pitching staff over there in San Diego at this point. So Tatis is my dark horse in the National League. Take me through the American League. Mike Trout, he's a dude. Aaron Judge, he's a dude. Both of those guys are, you have to put that asterisk next to them, that shade of pink over their name because of injuries. Who do you like in the American League, Joe?
There's so much fun in the American League. There are so many young stars and so many competitive teams. And like, of course, my eyes go right to Julio Rodriguez with his 5 tools and, Seattle's on the come up. I still don't think he's going to be the winner. I think this is going to be the breakout star year for Kyle Tucker. I know he's not, I don't think he's a favorite, but I don't know if people really realize that this guy he's like 40 home runs and 25 stolen bases in a bottle waiting to happen. And when you've got Bregman and Altuve, and again, this is one of those situations where it's like, man, I hope Yordan Alvarez doesn't drive in like 170 freaking runs and takes all the opportunity away from this guy. But if he gets the opportunities, if maybe Alvarez is beat up for 2 more months again this season, I think there's worse places to spend your money than Kyle Tucker. I think he's a tremendous player who's on pace to get a $200 million.
He was a 5-win guy last year, 157 games, 1 home run short of 30-30. He had exactly 30 stolen bases. He had 29 home runs. He's the kind of the prototypical Houston Astros bat these days, striking out 13% of the time, walking 12% of the time, hitting for power, hitting for average. I mean, it's one of the better hitters in the league. From a wins above replacement standpoint, like he's good in right field, but he's at a little bit of a disadvantage from that standpoint because you get Bobby Witt Jr., you get Adley Rutschman, you get Gunnar Henderson, you get Julio Rodriguez playing defensive spots. They're going to help that particular statistic. I know the highest WAR doesn't necessarily mean he's the MVP, certainly with voters, but that is going to prop those wins above replacement numbers up because those guys play those guys. And even Marcus Semien was a 6-win guy last year, despite the fact he was 20% worse as a hitter than Kyle Tucker. He was worth a win and a half more because of that. So that's going to be really interesting. It's pretty incredible that you made a really good point. The American League has so many. Julio Rodriguez, Bobby Witt Jr. were 6-win guys last year at like 12 years old. Adley Rutschman was a 5-win guy. Luis Robert was a 5-win guy. He's 26 years old. You mentioned Tucker, who's not for you. Gunnar Henderson was a 4.5-win guy last year as rookie of the year in 150 games. He's only going to take a step forward. Really, really interesting. Yeah. So Tucker's your guy. Is that your dark horse or is that the guy, if you were kind of putting money on it, that's probably a guy you go to at this point?
If I was putting money on it, I mean, if I'm in Vegas and I'm trying to get the most bang for my buck, I don't know how on this planet Bobby Witt Jr. has the 10th worst odds to win the MVP. I mean, I'm seeing plus 2,200, bet $100, make $2,200. I mean, how can you possibly have him behind a guy like Mike Trout or behind Adley Rutschman? Bobby Witt Jr. was awful. I don't want to say awful. He was incredibly pedestrian for the first 8 weeks of the season last year.
Baseball,
and then he put up googly numbers for
what kind of numbers? What kind of numbers?
So
what kind of numbers?
He's a shortstop.
Googly.
Right. Googly. It's googly actually. Yeah, so that's what he did. But tell me what about this doesn't intrigue you? Shortstop, at least a 70 runner. He's going to steal a boatload of bags, tons of power. A decorated glove that is, and coming off the hottest 3.5 month stretch of anyone on this list, I don't know how anybody can consider him the 10th worst odds. I would take Bobby Witt Jr. over Adley Rutschman just because of their offensive profiles. 100 times out of 100 times,
the best offensive player is going to win more often than not. That's the way the voting works. The thing with Vegas though, and the odds is they're just playing the public perception. That they're not looking at it and going,
Well, the
well,
public
yeah,
is
that's
stupid.
exactly it. They're like, we could just give 2,200, and then nobody's going to bet on that because they're gonna be like, well, he's not going to win. And then when he wins, Vegas wins, right? Like that's all they care about. They're just hedging. I don't know.
Dude, Bobby Witt Jr. has the same odds, at least in this sample, as Vlad. And Vlad was objectively bad last year.
Yeah, I think Vlad. I mean, unless you're telling me there's some sort of physical issue here, I think Vlad's a big time bounce back candidate. I mean, the guy's 20. He's not going to be 25 till March. This is a guy who just 2 years ago, 2021, was a 6-win guy, and it's all bat. So just like what you're talking about, it's all bat. I think he can get back to that. I think he can get back to that. I really do.
I just don't think I don't know if there's a margin. Like, look what Jordan did last year. He was unbelievable as a first base DH. Unbelievable. In my opinion, the best offensive numbers in the game.
You're talking about it.
No, he can't.
Well, he even played. I didn't say he could play. He even played some left field. But,
oh, I thought you said he can.
He even played. But I think the big thing with Jordan last year was that he missed 45 games. He only played 114 games last year.
And look at the numbers he put up, and he still finished a distant
I think in 2022, when he played more and wasn't even a full season, he put up almost 7 wins. So, yeah. Aaron Judge, fully healthy. Aaron Judge, 150 games. That's my favorite. But there's that star. There's that asterisk next to him.
Okay.
The only reason I don't like Julio Rodriguez here is where he plays his home games. And again, it's an offensive award. Not that he can't put up good numbers, but Seattle would probably have to win the division, and he'd probably have to do some traditional things like go 40-40 just to catch that kind of attention, to hit 300 just to catch that kind of attention, to get the vote. In fact, I would bet more aggressive that Julio leads the American League and wins above replacement before I would bet that he actually wins the MVP. Even if you told me he leads the league and wins above replacement, I would still bet on somebody else winning the MVP. But if we put Witt against Vlad Jr. and Witt against Alvarez and even Tucker, I think the biggest thing there is Witt's team sucks, dude. Like Kansas City's not doing anything that's going to, I'm not saying they're going to lose 100 games because they did grab some veterans that probably keep them out of the cellar and give them a chance to at least be relatively interesting, but I can't see more than 75 or 80 wins. That's not, you have to blow away the competition to win the MVP when your team is super mediocre.
I mean, man, that could happen though. Like Bobby Witt I don't think he could have to, reach his 100th percentile outcome to go 30. I think he could go 35, 35.
Well, he already did 30-30
and win a gold glove
30 last year.
Yeah, that's why I jumped to 35. He could jump to 35. I don't know if he's a 40 homer guy. Personally, I don't know if the hit tool will buoy him to a 40 home run season, but I do think he could go 35-35, win a gold glove at shortstop, be an 8.5 win player. And, with a little luck, he is going to have to see, Judge miss 6 weeks and, some of these other guys, maybe Gunnar Henderson. I think Gunnar Henderson's a fine vote as well. But, Corey Seager has, for me, I think been knocked off. I don't think Corey Seager's going to come back, and even though he almost did it last year, I just, Bobby Witt does everything well. He's going to get a ton of counting stats. He might win a gold glove. I think he could be a 9-win player. And with Bobby Witt and Julio, I think the narrative surrounding those two guys specifically is, well, Bobby Witt had an atrocious first 6 weeks of the season, and Julio had those two bookends where April and September were just terrible. I think if you get those guys to even 80% of their production in their 2 worst months, you're looking at 2 potential 7.5, 8-win players that should get top 3, top 4, top 5 at worst.
Any pitchers squeeze into the top 3 for you? We've seen some pitchers, not a lot. Clayton Kershaw won MVP in 2014. I believe Justin Verlander won it in 2011 when he was with the Tigers. Before that, we had a reliever, for crying out loud, win the MVP in 1992. Clemens won the MVP in 86. Guillermo Hernandez, a reliever, won it in 84. Raleigh Fingers won the MVP. So we've seen it, even some relievers. We're not going to see a reliever do it these days. Are there any pitchers that could stick themselves in that conversation at all for you in either league?
I don't know, man. I'd like to hear your point of view on that. I do look at Yamamoto, and I just think if he is the the ace, I mean, the unicorn that people think that he could be, if he's bringing stuff to the mound that people just simply have never seen, then I think there's a case to be made, especially with the marketing that's going to go around with the fanfare and being a Dodger and things like that. Like, I could see an avenue where he's a 7-win pitcher and he gets some votes. I don't see it, man. Like, even the Spencer Striders of the world, even the Garrett Coles of the world, to unseat a position player that posts an 8-win season, it's next to impossible for a pitcher to get to 8 wins, let alone 7 wins. I don't see any avenue for that happening. Is there a guy that you have in mind that would surprise you or wouldn't surprise you?
From a pitcher standpoint, I mean, man, it would have to be it would have to be somebody that's going to throw 215 to 220 innings. Is Yamamoto a guy that's going to go 200 plus innings, 210, 220 innings? His first year in the States on a new schedule, getting the ball every 5th and 6th day instead of every 6th and 7th. Is he going to go 7 and 8 on that schedule?
Good point.
I don't know if they're even going to want him to do that. So for me, it would have to be a Garrett Cole type. We know Jacob deGrom's going to miss at least half the season, so I don't see that there. Justin Verlander, not quite the guy that he was. I think that's really it. I think it's Garrett Cole or no. At this point, no, I don't see it at all. Who was the last pitcher?
Let me throw one other thing.
The 8 wins thing really quick. Who was the last pitcher to put up 8 wins? I think it was deGrom 6 years ago now. So you're right. That does not happen much. You get a 7+ win everyday player, they're winning the MVP.
But here would be my question for you. Do you think we've been a bit spoiled the last 2, 3? I mean, even going back to the Mike Trout days, do you think we've been a bit spoiled by just the generational seasons that players have been putting up? I mean, we're coming off an Aaron Judge record-breaking home run season. We're coming off a season where Ronald Acuna went 40 and 70. We're coming off years where Mookie Betts had an unbelievable year last year, and he didn't win it. So I'm curious whether or not this is such a golden age, in my opinion, of young stars putting up unbelievable totals. And you go back to the Mike Trout days and even a couple of those Bryce Harper years where it was like 9 wins, 9.5 wins. I think Trout had a 10-win season in there. Betts had a 10-win
season in 2018. Yeah.
So my point would be, like, are we getting spoiled with bats? Because you go back in history, and while there's been some pretty impressive seasons by FWAR, it was driven by batting average. These FWAR totals are being buoyed by ISO and Gold Gloves. It's such an unbelievable. You want to
hear something incredible about that Mookie Betts season in 2018, by the way, because I just pulled it up. He put up 10.4 wins above replacement in 136 games. He missed a month.
Yeah, that's incredible.
He missed a freaking month. That is ridiculous. That is absolutely just sick. Is Mookie Betts the most underappreciated star in Major League Baseball the last 15 years?
I don't think so. I think that Mookie could do more to market himself, which is weird to say because everybody knows who Mookie Betts is, but he actively chooses not to be on video game covers. He's not on magazines as much as you'd think.
And we're not
that guy.
We're not blaming
LA,
him for
he's
anything.
Flair.
We're saying if he did that, he would probably be more appreciated by the casual fan. That's all we're saying here, right? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, he is a superstar in every sense of the word. Is he underappreciated? Is he underrated?
I feel like a lot of fans think of Mookie Betts as
people that pay attention to the game.
I think a lot of fans think of Mookie Betts as a guy who was great, 7 years ago. That's not the case. Yes, he was great 7 years ago, but he's also great now. Like it hasn't gone away. It absolutely has not gone away. He was.
What was he? 8.5 wins last year?
8.3 in 152 games.
Guessing.
This is a guy who, like, we talk about this with Mike Trout a lot. If he retired now, would he be a Hall of Famer? I'm not saying Betts has had the career yet that Mike Trout has had, but Mookie Betts has been worth almost 60 wins above replacement already. And he's 30 years old. I mean, come
That's
on.
That's crazy.
Like, I don't know where Trout's at.
He will be, by standard definition, he will be a Hall of Famer. He's 30. He will be a Hall of Famer after this season.
Yeah.
That's amazing. He has not had the career that Mike Trout has had. Actually, while you're at it, and while I go on my soapbox, look up Bryce Harper because I'm curious with all the fanfare and how decorated Bryce Harper is. has Bryce Harper been worth more than Mookie Betts has
I'll
been?
look that up in a second, but let me
I
just
bet
throw
it's
out Mike
close.
Trout so we can get a little Mike Trout appreciation here. Broke into the league in 2011, was terrible, had to get sent back to the minors, came back in 2012 and put up 2 straight 10-win seasons. He's posted 85.1 FWAR. He's 31 years old. He just turned 32 at the end of last season. So Mike Trout, ridiculous. So Betts isn't even close to that. But he's 30 years old. He's put up almost 60 WAR. So Bryce Harper basically was drafted into the big leagues. He's 31 years old now. He'll spend all of 2024 at 31 years of age.
So a year older than Mookie.
And
but you think of Bryce having been in the sport for a decade. You think of him having been in the sport for a decade longer than Mookie.
Think of it.
So I'm curious to see how they stack up.
Bryce Harper, 47.5 wins above replacement. This is the Fangraphs formula. So he's about 11, 12 less than Betts at this point. But 2022, he only played 99 games, had the TJ, and then he started, he only played 126 games last year and, didn't play a whole lot of right field. So there's some things in it. It'd be a lot closer if he didn't hurt his elbow and missed that time. He'd be in the mid 50s or low to mid 50s at this point as well.
Yeah, before he signed with Philly, it was a lot of peaks and valleys. If I remember correctly, there was an 8-win season, there was a 7-win season, and then there was like a 2.5-win season, a 1.7 win season.
He literally went
if I'm
from age
recalling
19 until he left Washington at 25. He literally went 4.5, 4, 1.5 in 100 games, 9, 2.7, 4.2, 3, and then he went to Philly and went 4, 2, 6.5, 2.5, 3.5.
I don't think there's much doubt that Bryce Harper is going to
He's
be a
still
Hall
got
of
a little
Famer,
work to do though.
But he's still got to find like 18 FWAR at first base, which as a 31-year-old man, that's 4 good years.
Yeah, he's going to get there because he's 30 years because he's 31 years old. He's 31 years old. He's going to play 5 more years. He's going to play 5 more years. So he'll do 3.5.
Okay. But is he going to be is he? You think he's going to be a 3.5 win at first
yeah,
base?
on average over those 5 years. Yeah, because I still think he's got a couple of 5-win seasons.
I think
I think he's got a couple of 5-win seasons there. That really takes the pressure off some of the later years. I mean, his best seasons at the plate, and I'm not saying he's going to repeat those, but they're so monstrous. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Go back to that 9-win season. Dude at 330 and had a 197 WRC plus. He put up a 155 WRC plus in 2017, a 150, a 170, last year. Yeah, like last year, a 142. And we didn't even look at his season as being great, but 293, 401, 500 with in 126 games. I mean, he's insane. He had 21 home runs in 126. He's just a great hitter, and he was a good enough right fielder as well. So it sucks that he's not going to get to play right field at least this year. But I still think he's getting to 6. I think he's getting to 65.
Let me give you one more hot take because I think this is a very real possibility. You can get Luis Robert for plus 6,000. Bet $100, win $6,000. You can get him for plus 6,000. Let's say he is just destroying the game of baseball, which he did a lot of in 2023. He was really, really, really good. What if he is a 165 WRC plus 170 and he gets flipped to say the Astros?
So
I don't know if the Astros don't have the bullets. But
he stays in the league.
But what if he were to play 2 months? Yeah, what if he were to play 2 months for trying to think of who a reasonable
that's a Mookie Betts season.
He could go to
that's a
Seattle.
Mookie Betts season. If you're putting up a 160 to 170 WRC plus and you have that kind of defensive value that he has in center field, that is a Mookie Betts sort of Ronald Acuna Jr. type season. He's going to be worth 8 wins.
And if he finishes the season on a winner, because that's the whole thing with Bobby Witt, he ain't going anywhere. But if he finishes the season on a winner, are we talking about it totally changes?
I would look at it this way. If he's on a bad team, he better be at least 1 win better than the second best player in the league, or I'm not voting him MVP. If he's on, because I don't require the guy to be on a winner, but I do require him to play in games that matter. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Well, also you're not the voter. It's the voters that are antiquated and they want a winner.
if Robert is basically about the same guy as someone else, as Mike Trout, as Aaron Judge, as Julio, and he does have that split season, that's a really good question. It's a really good question. You're going to have a tough decision to make. But imagine he goes to one of those teams that already has
maybe
an MVP candidate. He's not going to win over the guy that's been with the same team all year. Like if they're essentially the same player and he goes to Seattle or he goes to Houston, or he goes to Texas and it's Kyle Seager or Corey Seager, excuse me. He's not winning it over the player that's been in the same place all year. I think that's just the way voters would look at it. I like to vote for the best player, and wins above replacement isn't the way to do it because I do lean offense, and I don't really love how much weight both of the formulas for WAR put on defense. I think it's a little too heavy, but the best offensive player who's on a good team doesn't even have to make the postseason, but is on a good team playing games that matter. That's the guy that I'm voting for. Officially, I think my pick would be Aaron Judge. That'd be my guess. If I were betting though, if I'm betting, I'm picking the Bobby Witts and the Kyle Tuckers and the, guys like that, because I'm taking the best bet, not the most likely to win. Like in the Cy Young, I put this out on Twitter. In the Cy Young race, I saw Logan Gilbert at plus 2,500, dude. Like this is a guy who was 26 years old, took a big step forward in swing and miss with that splitter last year. We know he can throw strikes. We know there's fastball value there. We know he has 2 breaking balls. The slider's a little bit. This is a guy who could add a win and a half or two to his, and it wouldn't surprise anybody. He could end up being a 6-win guy this year and win the Cy Young. I'm throwing $100 on Logan Gilbert. There's absolutely no question about it. That's the way that I like to bet. But if I'm picking,
if you get, I'm taking George Kirby. We sound like such homers by taking Seattle guys, but when you talk about like a 6'5"
again, hang on real quick, Joe. Yes, I think Kirby's more likely, but that's not the bet I'm making considering the odds that are there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Because I would pick Kirby too if I'm just trying to pick the guy most likely to win it. But Logan Gilbert at plus 2,500?
I'd take Trent Thornton. I bet I could get Trent Thornton at plus 100,000 and just
do you have the odds
by
in front
the
of you?
grace of
Do you have
Rob
the odds in
Manfred.
front of you at all? Okay, I'm gonna pull them up because I just thought of the guy that I'm betting the plus 2,500 for Logan Gilbert because I've already done it. Framber Valdez on FanDuel is plus 1,000. I'm in. He's best left-hander in the league, right? Yeah, I'm in.
That's good.
I'm absolutely in right there. Here's another interesting one. If he stays healthy, how about Detroit's ace? How about Tariq, the Seattle U kid, the lefty, Tariq Skubal? How about plus 1,600 on that guy just to make 29 starts? I bet $100 on that too. I'm going to go.
Really? They give you no. I think there are. I mean, this has turned into a gambling show. But there are guys with worse odds than Tariq Skubal that I would rather take Verlander at plus 3,000 or Grayson Rodriguez at plus 3,000 or Cole Reagans at 2,800.
Cole Reagans is an interesting one.
But in terms of the baseball side of this, I do think Cole Reagans is very interesting. In terms of the baseball side of things here, do you find it at all interesting that Seattle has 3 of the top 8 odds getters?
I mean, it's legitimate.
I personally, I think I would think George Kirby is top 3 or top 5.
He should be. He should be. He should be. I would put him right there.
It's such a high floor.
I would at least put him. The ones I'm looking at right now.
He's got
plus
4 wins.
16, plus 1,700 in some places. He'd be around 1,000 for me. He's right there with Corbin Burns, Pablo Lopez, maybe right there with Framber Valdez for me. But he's not that name yet. So that's what betting is about. They're trying to take advantage of the public. You got to love Vegas, dude.
Public.
Yeah, this is not a gambling podcast, but I tried to say on Twitter the other day and I caught myself mid-tweet. I'm not a gambler, but I kind of am. So I've literally just admitted that I have 3 bets on the table. There's no way I'm not going to have $500.
I need to get to. I need to go. I'm actually not a bettor either. I don't gamble in the state of Washington. When I go to Nevada, I do, but I don't do it in the state of Washington because it's just not my thing. But I do need to go to a casino and get down some year-long baseball bets because there's some good odds.
I love me some futures. I love when you can get creative with the futures and you can. Not all places will allow you to do this, but some places will allow you to go. I bet Julio Rodriguez hits 40 homers and Corbin Burns wins 15 or more games, where you can actually parlay individual player performances like that. Not all places will let you do that, but I think that's a lot of fun.
That's my speed.
Yeah, fun
That's
stuff.
my speed.
All right.
Got to parlay.
We'll talk a little Cy Young next week. Who we think's actually going to win, and maybe we'll just we'll combine Cy Young and Rookie of the Year in the same conversation, because I think that gets back to the prospect conversation.
That Rookie of the Year conversation, Jason. That Rookie of the Year conversation is going to be a delight. There are the new rules and the way that the minor leagues are stacking up right now. There are no less than 10 guys in both leagues that you could make a great
Think about this. Don't answer, but think about this, and we'll get at it and we'll talk next week. How many pitchers are among those 10? We don't see Rookie of the Year pitchers as much as we used to either. So that's a really interesting thing, and we'll get to that next week. Hey, we have a guest.
Is Ethan Salas a pitcher? Is Ethan Salas?
He can do whatever he wants, right? Like that's how we're treating Ethan Salas right now. He's 11 years old and he's in Double-A. Like, what do you want to do, right? Boy wonder, kid wonder.
Yeah, still cutting the crust off his sandwiches.
But he's not cutting his own crust off. Somebody's doing that for him because he's 11.
Of course not.
All right, joining us now for the first time on the show is Jim Duquette, former big league GM, Mets and Orioles. What is it, 20 years as an executive in Major League Baseball, now a co-host of Power Alley on MLB Network Radio, SiriusXM 89 with Mike Farron, and an analyst for SNY TV. Jim, appreciate you jumping on with this. Do you feel the fever when pitchers and catchers report? Are those magic words for you still? Because they certainly are for me.
Yeah, you know what, especially living, in the colder weather in Maryland and whatever, when we just had a little bit of a storm up the East Coast, and you start to see snow in New York. I was supposed to be in New York a couple of days ago, and it stopped my trip from just the snow itself. So you're like, man, did we just take a step backwards in the wintertime? But then pitchers and catchers comes and everything is all good in the world, right? You finally here's our baseball clock getting started again with pitchers and catchers and hopefully position players here in a couple days.
I've always loved that it's really not spring yet we call it spring training. So now I get to pretend that it's actually spring when it's really not, especially when you live in the North, because I live in the North as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's it. Like even if you're not in spring training, you feel like, when you get any shots of video of your favorite team, you're seeing blue skies, you're seeing the sun, you're seeing guys out there even running around in t-shirts or short sleeve shirts, or even if they have a sweatshirt on, it's fine. Like, instead of the winter coats and winter hats that we've been wearing here the last few days.
I'm sitting here wearing a hoodie right now, Jim. So I'm inside and I'm wearing a hoodie and a hat. So I totally get you there.
Exactly.
Hey, Jim, Joe and I have been talking, on and off all off season about kind of how the off season went for Major League Baseball. It seemed like, there'd be this lull, like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks of kind of nothing. And we wait, and then we get a couple of big, pieces of news. We waited for Ohtani for a while. We waited for Yamamoto for a while. And it just felt like there was a lot of this slow, anticlimactic, kind of lull and almost no buzz to some point where, at least relative to years back. And I'm just wondering if you think that is an actual issue for Major League Baseball, because I think to me, it seems like there's an opportunity they're missing there. But what can you do about that? Is there anything Major League Baseball can do to maybe encourage more action, or to maybe squeeze that action into a smaller period of time so they can kind of dominate the headlines a little bit?
Yeah, I agree with you. We do miss an opportunity. I feel like the winter it goes in segments, right? You've got the trade market and the free agent market. Sometimes the trade market disrupts the signings and delays the signings, because as you're looking at it as a GM side, you're like, I want to pursue, this avenue first, this player acquisition or these player acquisitions. And then that gets started sometime in September towards the end of the season, and October, and you have the GM meetings in early November. So that timetable is important. So really we've seen with the free agency, like the later you wait, a lot of times you see the prices go down. And, this year we'll have to wait and see with all the guys that are still available. But so there's a general reward for front offices if you wait on the signings until later, for the most part. So I think that, but I think what we're seeing, and like you guys were, saw the winter meetings too. Like in Nashville, we had sent all these people, all media, front offices. We take up this huge hotel, massive hotel there, the Opryland Hotel, and we're all there waiting for action, and like barely anything gets done. And that's the opportunity that's missed, right, for the sport and just to get more attention to signings in baseball in general. So I feel like you could put a timetable on the trade market like we do during the summer. Like we put a trade deadline, right? August 1st, July 31st. Put it, what it could be middle of November. And now, or you could put it for the winter meetings up until the winter meetings, and then the free agency starts. Whatever it might be, I think we could kind of figure out where that line is. Maybe it's early November. And then, okay, now the free agency opens up, and then, we get to January, late January, maybe it's February 1st, you get to open up the trade market again. There's all sorts of things that you could do on that. But I do think that the one example that we had was when the CBA negotiations were going on there a couple of years ago. They said, okay, as of December 3rd, it's gonna be a lockout. There's gonna be no signings at all. How about the flurry of signings that we had leading up to that, right? So I feel like that's kind of the example, even though we haven't seen it in our sport before or since. So yeah, I mean, maybe there is something to that MLB and the players should consider.
Yeah, no doubt, Jim. First of all, it's great to see you again, bud. It's been a while. Looking forward to seeing you see you in July. I got a question for you. So actually, it's a two-part question. With all these guys reporting to spring training right now, Justin Verlander is behind, Kyle Bradish behind, Gregory Santos behind. Do you sometimes feel like I do this time of year? I feel behind, like most of these guys. I feel behind. How are you doing these days?
Behind in sleep, behind in work, behind in like everything, right? Yeah, getting up to speed on baseball, getting up to speed on prospects, all of it. Like, yeah, I think. I wish though that we could kind of delay and get paid the same amount of money just for reporting to spring training a little bit behind on your schedule, or maybe not being ready to start the regular season by 30 days. We'd still get paid good monne. Like, I would love to have that happen in the real world.
Is spring training too long? Is spring training too long, Jim? Like for players, is it too long?
We felt like the pitchers, it was okay for the pitchers, position players, like, they wanted to get out of there, right? For like 3 weeks, 4 weeks. I think the pitchers, it's primarily spring trainings for the pitchers to kind of build them up. And I think though you could reduce it by a week and make sure your pitchers were in better throwing shape and, performing out of the gate a little bit sooner. Teams are really conservative these days anyway, like the Orioles with Bradish. I feel like, Bradish certainly has, a PRP injection, as we heard. But, Mike Elias has a history of being really, really conservative, not just, in the minor leagues, but, the prospects, but the major league level too. So, you have to kind of sort through some of that too. And I think Andrew Friedman told me this on my show back in the fall. He's like, these injuries to starting pitchers, or just pitchers in general, it's an epidemic. And we don't, as a sport, know what to do about it. And I think when you get one of the smartest guys in the sport kind of throwing up his hands going, I don't know what to do. The sport doesn't know what to do about it. Like, we have a problem, it seems like.
Well, we've reached the threshold. I mean, the human body is not supposed to do this 100 to 120 times once a week, right? And once guys are training to the point of failure, you're going to see a lot more of it. But that actually kind of blends well into another question. You being a former front office guy, you talked about top prospects, Mike Elias. Why do you think top prospects, and when I say top prospects, I'm saying top 20, top 25 guys in the game, we don't see them moved anymore? It's almost always premium talent going over to someone for bulk. And I'm just wondering, where do you think that shifted in the game over the last, say, 10 or 15 years?
Boy, that's a good one. And I always love having these type of conversations, because the value of prospects and what do you put on it, in terms of their productivity, and then the surplus value that you get from it. I feel like somewhere in that 5 or 6, 7, probably even going back 10 years, some of the teams were ahead of the curve probably. But, as that, became more prominent, teams were doing, realizing that, boy, if I can, let's take Gunnar Henderson, who this year was a 4.5 win player, according to Fangraphs. And, if one WAR is 9 or 10 million This guy gave you upwards of almost $45 million of value, and you paid him $700,000. And so all of a sudden, his surplus value is in that $44 million range. And you're going, well, do I want Gunnar Henderson or do I want Jose Ramirez, who's a really good player, who is maybe a 5-win player, and you're paying him $30 million a year, and how do you manage that whole payroll structure along with your roster construction? So I feel like that's where teams are like, okay, well, if I'm going to compete, let's say with the big high-end high revenue teams, I better develop, I better sign and scout really good players and use their value to my advantage. And I think Tampa does it probably the best, right? We've seen that too. So I feel like Tampa was maybe the team that everyone is trying to copy. You just look at, all the executives that have gone through Tampa that are now running other clubs. So I feel like that's, it's a copycat league, just like in other sports, but I feel like they became the example. So maybe when they were being really good and people started to dissect their success, maybe that's where we came, how we got here.
Jim, this sounds like what you're telling me is the game has just become a lot more about economics. And that suggests to me that teams are just going to try to spend less and less and less, meaning they'd rather have, that kid, that Gunnar Henderson or whoever that might be, the Nolan Jones, instead of the veteran that's making some money. So this makes me think, are we just going to, like as a league, they probably don't care because we understand the league is the owners. But from a fan standpoint, I want to see something done about that. I want teams to be more aggressive and try to win like now and next year and not always think about how cheaply they can, make money essentially at the end of the day. When a team like Pittsburgh or Cincinnati can somehow end the season in the black and they didn't really make much effort to win, I hate seeing that. So I guess what I'm getting at is here, are you in favor in any manner of some sort of a salary floor? Forget a salary cap, but some sort of salary floor sort of a system, even if it's not a hard one, something to motivate these clubs to go out and actually try to win every year?
We do need more of an incentive-based system, in my opinion. And when just a smaller issue that was a problem for the Players Association, it was service time manipulation, right? And you started to see the adjustment that were made by the Players Association. They said, you know what, no matter when you bring a guy up, if he is in the top 2 in Rookie of the Year voting, then he gets a full year of service time. And so teams are looking at it, they go, well, geez, if I wait till June and he becomes a Rookie of the Year or the runner-up, I've wasted April and May with him down in the minor leagues. I could use him as on my roster right now, producing for me. So they said, okay, well, we won't, we're not going to manipulate the major league service time as much. It was incentive-based. Oh, by the way, if they were in the top 2, you get a draft pick for that, right? So I feel like in the competitive landscape of this, to be more competitive or to challenge these teams to be more competitive, I think you could give them incentive by giving them another comp round pick or some level of compensation for winning with a lower payroll or that kind of thing, or to spend a certain amount of money, up to a certain amount of money, you could give them incentive that way. There's some formula that people smarter than me can figure out, but we know this: front offices, they love prospects, they love draft picks, and if you want to get them to spend money or try to win, all you got to do is dangle those things there at the end of the season, and they're all over it, right? So I feel like there's something there that we could do as a sport to improve in that area.
So I guess that kind of bleeds into the Scott Boras conversation that you were just mentioning, it kind of by proxy, right? Yeah. Is Scott's job getting harder because you got guys like Matt Chapman and Cody Bellinger, Jordan Montgomery, Blake Snell. These guys are still on the market because they are, Scott, I'm assuming, is demanding 2016, 2017, 2018 pricing. Have you worked with Boras clients? And if you look at it from the other lens, what does Boras have in terms of leverage now with just a couple of weeks left?
Right. Scott is one of the best in the sport, right? We know that. And I think what sometimes happens, there are years where you are impacted by the fact that he has these 4 or 5 top guys, and you're seeing a lot of teams, because of the RSN situation, not have an understanding of what their revenues are, or they're not knowing until, recently, February, or there's a reluctance to spend because they don't view the quality, or the asking price is too high, or a combination of all those factors, I think plays into this. The hard part with Scott is, and I think this is why we saw the bottom up approach in the free agent market this year, was if you wait until the end of the free agent market for Scott Boras players, their price to come down, and you're not doing anything else, it disrupts your whole winter. You don't get any other players. All the other starting pitchers, as an example, are off the board. And if you needed a starting pitcher, you're stuck with Snell. That's where he has all the leverage. But you saw a lot of teams signing these other starting pitchers, 1-year deals, 2-year deals. The Seth Lugos, Michael Lorenzen hasn't gone off the board, but you saw Eduardo Rodriguez. Some of these guys go off sooner, and because of that, I think, they didn't need or don't need Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery as much to flush out their roster. And so, we'll see at the end what ends up happening with them. Generally, you see the price come down about this time. He's been willing to take them into the regular season, which is, I never have seen, at least over the years. I remember Stephen Drew. You guys remember this? Stephen Drew, Kendrys Morales. They didn't sign till the summertime. It didn't go well that year. I think Pedro Martinez. We've seen Roger Clemens do it. He's this guy. He was a freak at the time. He's 40 years old, and he knew how to keep himself in shape. But a lot of these guys don't know how to keep themselves in good shape to participate or play at the high level when they do come back, if it is in the regular season. So there's a lot of factors for me that I don't think that really works overall for teams. So, we'll wait. But I do think the Boras factor has had a lot to do with how slow the winter is. But I think there's also the RSN, whether teams are being honest about it or not, the RSNs have, I think, affected some teams.
Yeah, and it's happened for, it didn't really work for Keuchel, but it happened with Keuchel. It happened with Kluber. And I'm just curious,
That's right.
This happened 2 years ago. Maybe it was last year. I'm trying to rack my brain. This happened with Carlos Correa too. I know that was a bit of a circus in terms of the actual deal getting signed, but that went late. I just think, I look at it from the Montgomery and Snell perspective specifically, and I just think every day that goes by is another day that they can't ramp. And you're losing leverage by the hour when you're telling teams essentially, yeah, I got this ace, I got this number 2, I got this frontline guy, but he's not going to be ready for April. If you were in the chair of a GM, how much do you take into that?
Well, there's definitely angst. A guy like Snell, I think partly this guy has had 2 unbelievable seasons, right? 2 Cy Young seasons on either end, and then in the middle, it's been 120 innings max, right? So it's a little bit of a flawed player, but I still would love to have him. I just don't want to have to pay $200 million for him or $180 million for him, And I think the market is kind of telling you that it's not, they don't view him as being worth that. Jordan Montgomery is a different case. He's if you asked me before the offseason, or let's say before he got traded to Texas, I would have said, oh, he's maybe $100 million player. All of a sudden now, because he pitches well in the postseason, it's 150 or more million bucks, and I don't think teams quite view him in that regard. Again, we're going to wait and see what ends up happening on that. But I think those 2 in particular, I would have not as much of an issue with either of those pitchers if I had them on a long-term basis, if the price was right, knowing that, okay, I can get them, into my organization at the, say the major league level sometime end of April, provided that he's pitching in spring training and pitching against, minor league hitters and stuff like that. It's still not going to prepare him totally, but I'd be willing to take that gamble that he would be productive in the second half. But not every team's willing to do that, and we've seen a lot of, I'd say inconsistency with those guys, which is what makes it, I think, difficult for.
And a lot of those teams that don't want to do it are the teams that are hoarding their prospects, like we just got done talking about. They're like, yeah, we got these guys coming. You think of Pittsburgh, why would they go out on the market and spend any kind of money? Not that they do that anyway, but they got all this pitching coming. They're just going to wait for that pitching to come and pay that guy $750,000. So it kind of leads to my last question here. At what point can a team actually start planning on a certain prospect? Because like, I know you don't want to look too far ahead. A kid's 3-4 years away. He's 19, 20 years old. You're not necessarily thinking, we're not going to do anything there because we got this guy coming. But how good does that prospect have to be in your eyes? And how close does he have to be to the big leagues before you start to say, hey, I'm not going to go out on the market and sign a long-term answer at that particular position?
Yeah. So, that answer is really, it varies by player, as we know. So there, we always know, and we've always, like everybody says this, player development isn't a linear process, right? It's rocky, and when you think he's ready, we wanted to give them a certain number of at bats or a certain number of innings in the minor leagues. Now guys are speeding through. Teams are pushing them to the big leagues because they need that value. They need that production, cheap production, to help balance out their roster. I think with what we're seeing, once these guys get to the AA level, it's not that much longer or further that a lot of teams are realizing, okay, we can bring them up and they can be productive really quickly, maybe as early as May of that year. And if you're not playing service time issues or manipulating it, then even making like a Jackson Chourio who's going to be in the big leagues this year without playing any AAA ball, right? So I think we're seeing those top. Another reason why we're not seeing those top level prospects moved is, they're skipping AAA, or they're a month in AAA and they're coming up and helping you, at the major league level. And any more Adley Rutschmans or Gunnar Hendersons, and I think you'll continue to see teams just hoard. That's why they're hoarding those top 3 or 4 guys for the most part. So, to answer your question, I think when you kind of look at it, these high school kids, if they can get there at age 21 or 22. Man, oh man, that is a tremendous, and you're getting the type of value that we are now, right? They're going to these events, national events. They're developing, the Future Star Series events that we are a part of, and some of these other events where they're competing against the top level guys at 17, 18. You never had those, when I was first starting out in the minor leagues as a minor league director. So you had to have this step-by-step process just to make sure they're ready. Now they're getting ready.
Jim, really appreciate your time. Are you going to make it down to spring training? Are you going to get down to Florida? Are you going to get to Arizona? You guys going to go to camps and see some clubs?
I'm going to Arizona for, I think, 11 camps I have.
Good for you.
And then I'm going to go to Florida for Mets camp. The prospect game in spring training, I'm going to broadcast that for SNY. I know you guys be watching those too, but that's a new twist that Major League Baseball added that I love. And we're going to broadcast that game on SNY mid-March. So yeah, I'll be there too. How about you guys?
I'll be down there in mid-March. Yeah, to get a look. I'll be in Arizona to do that. Mostly at Mariners camp, but I always wander all around. Surprise is a fun place to go. Salt River is a fun place to go. So I'll see some of that as well. Hey Jim, I really appreciate your time. Great to have you on. We'll do this again. I'm sure enjoy your time down in spring training. Say hello to Mike for us, and tell him a good joke. Tell him a good joke, and tell him it came from me.
Yeah.
I will. And he'll laugh.
He's too nice.
Anything to pad Jason's stats.
Exactly. Thank you. You guys know me already. This is amazing. Yeah. Thanks, Jim, for Jay.
All right. See you guys.
That's Jim Duquette. A lot of fun. Jim's done everything. Joe. Jim has done lots of scouting, farm directing, front office. Now he's got a radio show, does TV analyst work. He's going to call that prospect game. A lot of fun.
I'm excited for that. I'm excited for that game.
I am. And now that I have an idea who's calling those games, somebody that actually has a clue, I'm a little happier about it because that's not something I knew before we had this.
They called me and said, "Do you want to broadcast that game?" And I said, "I don't have a clue." And so they called Jim. So,
or you said yes, but only if Churchill comes with me, and they said, forget it then.
I said yes, but I don't have a clue. Will you still take me? And they said, we'll call Jim.
Oh boy. Yeah. The self-deprecating humor never gets old. Joe,
it's because we don't know how we got here, Jason.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot before we sign off here really quick. I'm going to put you on the spot for the big question, even though we haven't been talking about this at all today. We talked about MVP. We'll do Cy Young and stuff next week. I'm going to put you on the spot. As spring training gets underway, who's the best team in the American League and who's the best team in the National League? I think on paper, at least, the best team in the National League is probably the Dodgers, but maybe the Braves. In the American League, it seems to be more wide open, and that's why I'm asking the question. Who's the best team in each league?
Man, that's a good question. Who's the best team, or who's going to win the pennant?
Who's the best team? It's you get to the playoffs, and I don't want to say it's a crapshoot, but a lot of teams can win it once you get there.
I think the best team in the AL is probably
it's not an easy
Houston.
answer. It's not an easy question to answer, right?
Houston has the bullets in the rotation, the bullets in the bullpen, and one of the most fearsome 5 or 6 in the top of the lineup that I don't know if anybody can really match. Those would be the teams that I would circle. In the NL, I actually think it's Atlanta. Personally, I still don't know if the Dodgers have enough pitching both on the front end and in the back end to claim to be the best team in the National League. I mean, the Braves may not have star power in the 2, 3, 4 spots in their rotation, but they're pretty deep and they got guys that should bounce back this year. So I think I would go with Atlanta in the NL.
So are the Dodgers the second best team then in that scenario in Major League Baseball? Would you say that those two teams are ahead of anybody in the American League?
I think it's a pretty sizable gap too. Like, who's the third best team in the NL? Is it Philly? Philly's a great October team. Don't get me wrong, but are they built to sustain over 162? I don't know. It seems like another team that wins, 89 games, 91 games, and we're talking about them in the NLCS. I think it's clearly a 2-horse race. As much as I want to believe Arizona is one of the better teams in the National League, they still have a lot to prove.
Now, one last thing before we go. I said that was going to be one last thing, but this is one last thing. Do any of those teams that are under Houston, under the Dodgers, under the Braves, there are 4 significant free agents left. If a specific team signed a specific free agent, does any of your answers change? If Texas or Seattle or Baltimore signed one of those 4 free agents, are they maybe on paper better than Houston? And it does Philly. If Philly adds one of those, are they maybe better than Atlanta or the Dodgers?
Well, the team that I look at is the team that won over 100 games last year, Baltimore, right? I mean, how much different does Baltimore, especially now that we know about the Kyle Bradish injury, how much different does that organization look with Blake Snell? You got Blake Snell and Corbin Burns at the front with guys like Dean Kramer and, John Means should be good by May, I would think. That's a pretty good looking team. I wish that they still had Bautista at the back end, but I still think that when you look at that Houston roster, there's 12 or 13 guys, 14 guys that you can rely on to get impact outs or take impact at bats. Curious for you on your side, would anything change in your rankings if Matt Chapman ended up somewhere?
Chapman doesn't move the needle for me, really, for anybody. I think he makes Philly better because I think he's better than Alec Bohm, but it's not significant, and they wouldn't be catching Atlanta or the Dodgers with an addition of Chapman. But if you gave, for example, the Yankees Blake Snell, I'm starting to take the Yankees seriously at that point. If you gave the Blue Jays Cody Bellinger, I'm really starting to take the Blue Jays seriously at that point. If you gave the Rangers Jordan Montgomery back or Blake Snell, now I think they're right there with the Astros. Now, we don't really know exactly what's going to happen with the Seager thing, just like we don't know what's going to happen with the Verlander thing. But I think in the American League, the answer to that, to my own question is, yeah, I think there are some free agents out there that could flip that a little bit, or at least bring it even. In the National League, I don't know. I think you'd have to say Philly signs 2 of those players. Then maybe we're talking about, a new best team in the National League, right? Yeah. Like if they sign Snell and Cody Bellinger or Snell and Matt Chapman or something like that, that might move the needle for me.
You think I think you're probably in the same boat as me. You think Philly's going to grab a guy, right? Like there's just not too many places guys can land. And it always seems like Philly is just kind of
I think they would have signed Blake Snell already if he wanted to play on the East Coast. I really do.
Not necessarily
it
Snell,
doesn't have to be Snell, but
are we surrendering to the idea?
That's the team.
Are we surrendering to the idea that Cody Bellinger is going to Chicago?
No, I think because if he really wanted to go to Chicago, he'd already be in Chicago. So now it's about the dollar. Who's going to pay him? At least for now, at least until he signs, that's what it's about. I just think with Philly, we've heard the buzz on Snell with Philly. We haven't really connected Philly to anyone else. Yeah. That doesn't mean they wouldn't do it, but that's just what I was going by at that point. So yeah, it's really interesting. There are a lot of teams in it, and I don't want to call it parity. I just think there are a lot of teams with a chance to be really, really good this year if some things go right for them, if they stay healthy, and if they catch a break. I think you're right. I think Houston's probably the best team on paper, but it doesn't take a lot for that to change. And I think that was the whole point of this conversation. So I'm going to run with that. We're going to get out of here, and we're going to talk next week. Joe, appreciate it. Good time as always. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been the FSS Plus podcast.
So just chill till the next episode. Falling back on that ass, what a hellified gangster lean.